I welcome everybody, and I'm so excited to be here with you. I'm actually currently on study leave, but I planned my study leave after I planned the book study, the book, the book club schedule, and it's been nice to just have time to finish working my way through Alf's book. And I'm up in Alert Bay. I'm currently joining you from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Namgis First Nation, up in the top of the Johnson Straits off the northeast coast of Vancouver Island, which is where I was born. And so enjoying a week here with my parents without my family, and just having some good parental daughter time and time for reading and writing. I invite you to, if you feel so called, to also to put into the chat where you are joining from, if you have a land acknowledgement you would like to share. So that I don't forget, because I am a little scattered today, I realized that the schedule for the fall is not yet posted, and we're trying to still figure out the October, November, which books and which guests will be here. But for those of you who may want to spend our 2-month break preparing for our September book club, the September book is going to be Maximum Canada by Doug Saunders. And the discussant is going to be Cam Fraser, who is just finished his first year as director of growth and church development in the unit for organizational development and strategy in the general counsel office. Cam is a newly ordained DLM with many, many years of experience in ministry leadership in the church, and is really excited to be leading the team of 6 growth animators that are working with the regions across the church to work on ministry renewal and growth. And so we were talking about this book, Maximum Canada, which journalist Doug Saunders wrote around the changing demographics in Canada and our relationship to immigration, and why Canada can become a stronger country through immigration. I imagine as I work my way through that book, I will have some thoughts as an Indigenous person about that, having not read the book. So that will be our book in September. Tonight, I'm really pleased to welcome somebody that I have known as long as I have memories in the church. That is the Reverend Alf Dumont. You all know that I'm a member of the Heiltsuk First Nation, but my mom was first an alternate and then a delegate to some of the national consultations that Alf writes about in his book. And so really, really grateful, Alf, for you to be here, not only because of this beautiful, beautiful memoir that you've written, but also because this is the first of 4 special book clubs that we're doing, which are the centennial editions. So most of you will know that on June 9th, in advance of June 10th, we kicked off with our 99th birthday in the United Church of Canada, a centennial year of commemoration of the history of the church. And so I wanted to have at least 4 books between June of this year and June of next year that were written by United Church authors. And so I was also very pleased that when I wrote to the initial 4 United Church authors whose books I wanted to include, that you had indicated that this month worked well for you, because I thought that's very fitting to have an Indigenous voice be the first official centennial edition of our book club. We did squeak in Renee Cyclicar, the poet. We read her book, Brahma and the Beggar Boy, last month, but that was a later ad after we had planned the centennial editions. And so yours is the first as part of our commemorating this first 100 years of the United Church of Canada. And so I'm really grateful that you are here. I'm not going to spend as much time doing an intro, because our book is an intro to your life. But we usually spend like the first half hour, 45 minutes or so in discussion between the 2 of us, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments and reflections from those who are joining us from book club across the country. And we have people that join from I'm not sure that I've noticed if we've had people from the territories, but we definitely have people from the West Coast to the East Coast, and sometimes I think we have a few people who watch later on who joined from Yellowknife and Whitehorse. So I'm really grateful that you're here tonight. Great.
I'll introduce myself, Alf Dumont, Indigenous, Bedabin Magizi Anishinaabe Niwins, Wawasheshi and Dodum, Shanaga and Dushnaba, Coquetlam, and Deanungum. My name is Alf Dumont. That was the name I was given when I was born. I was given later by one of the elders, Gladys Taylor, the name Break of Day Eagle. I come from the Martin clan, and I grew up in the Shawnigan territory and now live in Coquetlam territory. It's good to be here.
So first, this is a great suggestion you just made while we were getting ready for folks to join us, is I would love for you to tell the story of why you wrote this book. I mentioned that you know, I've known of you or known you almost my whole living memory. You've been somebody that I've known to be in leadership in the church, but you're and I laughed and I cried reading your book. And I feel like you've left us such a treasure sharing this memoir with the whole church. And so why did you write your memoir for the church?
Well, as you read the book, you just probably discovered that I'm very much an introvert. And when I was growing up, it was very difficult for me going to school. I was bullied, uh, put down, criticized, and yet I was tremendously supported. In the midst of that, even the bullies became my close friends. In the journey, as I started doing some work in the United Church after my education, some of the people that I knew from all the way from Parry Sound area said, "Why don't you write your story?" Other people in the United Church said the same thing. Why don't you write your story? Your story has very much meaning for us, especially as a person of Indigenous background, struggling with First Nations spirituality and Christianity, struggling with who you are as a First Nations person, but also one who carries French, Irish, and English inside you. And as my analyst says, you have three nations fighting one inside you. And all of those things. So it was difficult because as a shy young man, it was difficult to share my full story. I didn't know what that would mean for people and how I would live out that story as I wrote it, and people began to critique me or criticize me, because that's the fear an introvert has. But I listened to all the voices, and some of the voices from across Canada saying, "You've got to write your story. It's really important for us." So it took 20 years to write, as I wrestled with what do I say and how do I say it? And part of the thing is I had to use the humor that I was raised with. And you saw that in the book. You laughed as you cried. Uh, and that was part of who I am. And the humor helps me find and present the balance that I need in life. So it was from the encouragement of others that I wrote the book.
Hmm. Um, you know, being somebody also with mixed heritage and growing up with that sense of humor that I think is really easy to share with other Indigenous people and sometimes doesn't always land correctly outside of our circles. When you told the story of the working with the circle of uh, young men who in the paraplegic ward in the hospital, and the head nurse not really catching not thinking your humor was funny, I was like, oh, I know so much what that feels like when you have like a good res zinger and it just bombs.
Well, part of the humor for me is puns and looking at
Yeah,
words that have so many different meanings. Yeah.
yeah. Um, the most important question that I don't want to forget is on page 78. I think it's when you're telling your story about uh meeting, yeah, it's in the chapter where you met Barb. Page 78, there's a picture of you and Barb and Wayne Fraser in the mid 1970s, and I want to know when you're going to grow your hair back out and sport the fabulous 1970s mustache with their hairband in that picture.
that was a time and a period. I, I am not growing my hair back out any further than it is now. My son is experimenting with that, or one of my sons is experimenting with that, and that's part of the journey of life.
Yeah.
Because in that time, we were also in the time when young men grew their hair long, and it was
Hmm.
part of the expression of who they were, as opposed to all the other people around them, and they had to express themselves. And so I found a moment when I did that, but then as I got more involved in the church again, I cut my hair and followed that route. And but that's part of the journey of life. We do those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Um, I wonder if there's anything in particular. So the big question that I asked you that folks in the book club will know that I ask everybody, that we can get to eventually, is like, what would you hope the United Church of Canada would take away from your book? But before we get to that discussion, I'm wondering if there's anything in particular um, that you want to read to us from the book, or a story that you want to share for the purpose of discussion.
I have to put on my glasses to read. So
Yeah.
uh, there's a small
You're
section.
lucky I have to wear my glasses all the time.
Okay. Um, okay. In 2013, I was splitting wood for the fire by the Sweat Lodge at BCIT, British Columbia Institute of Technology. Jerry Ullman, our lodge keeper and elder of Indigenous Services, taught us more about wood. He had a large pile of pieces at the base and then split kindling to go with keep the next fire going, and then pile on the grandmothers and grandfathers, the rocks, and finally to split bigger pieces to cover the grandfathers and grandmothers before we lit the fire. This was the ritual way of working with rock and wood. Relationships are like that. We learn from each other at different stages of our lives. We are taught to be grateful and to show that gratefulness in the way we live. We are taught by self-giving of all beings. For that, we always give thanks. Those are the lessons my father instilled in me. Those are the lessons that the trees also taught me. Those are the lessons that my elders taught me as I walked across the floor of the lodge. Those are lessons my mothers and aunts instilled in me and reinforced every time we shared the table in the kitchen, eating supper with our relatives, or whatever life took us. I am grateful, and I seek to offer those teachings to my sons and granddaughter, and to my nephews and nieces, and to the young ones who will listen to an old man who listens to the spirits, and the spirits come in the trees, the Andegwag, the Wasiki Mayongan, Nigiziwag, and the Gwekogwag, the spirits who reinforce the teachings of the laughing Jesus. While I was in the bush, and I continue to go back there often, the Spirit, the Holy, I think, tried to teach me a song. I tried to sing it. It takes me a long time to get the words right and the melody straight, but it is coming. And someday I will sing that song well, as I will tell my story well. And when I do, someone will hear it and say, that's a good song. That's a good story. When we sing our songs or tell our story, and we do that from our hearts, we will do it well. I will know that I have listened well to the words of my father and uncle when I crossed the floor of the lodge to the western door, to Dora's spirit world. And that is the task of all human beings, to walk their story with honor, to tell their story well, to live with integrity what they have learned. When we do that, then we will leave the place that we have lived in as good a condition as we found it, as those who went before us. We are told by the old ones that we are responsible for 7 generations before us and 7 generations who follow. We learn from and carry the teachings in the way we live and honor the teachings from the 7 generations before us and share those teachings with the next generations who follow. And they, in turn, will share it with those who follow them. We do this and what we say and how we live. We want those who follow to have the same blessings of Mother Earth as we have had and those before us. And we will remember the teachings, and we should take nothing more than we need and give back as much as we can so that those following us will be able to care for those who follow them. I hope I have done that. It's sort of the essence of the writing is to share some of those powerful teachings that are deep spiritual teachings that come from both the Christian understanding and the traditional understanding. And they are all about living in a good way with each other, finding ways we can live with each other and work with each other as we walk down the road of life and share our stories. Our stories are so important. It's important for me to hear your story and read your story. It's important for you to read my story. And as we do that, we learn from each other. I'm reading several novels that came out of the local writers of Coquitlam and Port Moody. And it's kind of neat to read their stories. Those are important to me because I'm sharing with people here some of those teachings. And I've shared my book. So that's part of the library at Port Moody in Coquitlam now.
I love that idea. I mean, I think one of the privileges of being moderators, I had no idea how many self-published authors that we have in the United Church of Canada. And as I've traveled across the country, people come up to me after church or after the flourishing workshop, and or they pop it in the mail and they say, "Here, I want you to have a copy of my book or a copy of all of my books." And I have this growing stack. It must be 50 or 60 books at this point, that are all self-published or small local presses, not highly marketed, not even well known without I mean, oh, her name is escaping me. There's one former national UCW president or regional UCW president who's written Miss Stobie has written a lot of books that are well read within UCW circles, but I've kept them all as treasures because I think Janet Stobie, thank you, Sharon. When I think of our commitment to being an intercultural church, it is that sharing of story that is so important to really being willing to learn and understand who another human being is, and then being open to being transformed by the presence of that other person.
Right.
And I have this dream of when I joined the faculty of Emmanuel College, making like an elective class on reading the stories of the United Church of Canada. So like keeping all these precious little treasures that people have given me. And I don't know if we'll be able to get enough copies to run a full class or anything, but I'm hoping I could at least get permission to copy excerpts or something like that. But it's a beautiful, like I said, it's a beautiful gift that you've given to the church. One of the things that I have been, I guess, like rumbling with in my own spirit and my own heart as somebody who studied Christian mission, and specifically the ways that Indigenous ways of being could make mission and evangelism more life-giving and inclusive. I think because in our traditional ways of being, we do that intercultural piece well. I have traditionally done it well. Is this idea of being a church of deep spirituality, bold discipleship, and daring justice. And I know I love that you recognized, especially at St. James, but in other contexts of ministry, how deeply faithful were the communities of faith that you served. They were, and our church is known for being a church of daring justice, but I feel like maybe one of the challenges that we have to overcome is when we started to denounce colonialist thinking and colonialist ways of being without really knowing how to be anything different, we also kind of slowed our roll on faith formation and discipleship and sharing our story as Christians. and like, and I feel like who we've become as a church is such a precious gift to the world of Christianity, because we have landed in this place of much more inclusivity and acceptance than a lot of other denominations globally. And you would know that from your work with the World Council of Churches. But like, when you think of your own struggles of how to reconcile Indigenous spirituality and your Christian formation, and the ways that that would like put you in cultural conflict within yourself or between you and the church over time, and you think of the ways that the church has hurt Indigenous communities, like how do we reconcile that and not have like thrown out a sense of evangelism with the colonialist missionary bathwater? Like, I feel like we throw the evangelist baby with the missionary bathwater. And yeah, so I don't know if that question even makes any sense. I'm having a very extroverted moment out here where I'm having to like talk until I land somewhere. I don't know if I landed. I don't know if I landed my question, but do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. I think the journey is a lifelong journey for us, but a lifelong journey for institutions. It's not easy to become open and hear each other. And one of the images that I use quite often, we sit in the circle of life. Churches aren't set up in circles; they're set up with a pulpit at the beginning, and then people sit back. In the circle of life, we're all equal. We all have something important to share. On Sunday, when we do our services, we don't hear all the voices. We don't hear people who heard that part of the story. And then when it comes to their turn to speak, they share their understanding, and that gives insight to the ones who shared the story before. We have to find new ways in which we can express our spirituality, and ways that honor and respect. And if someone gains insight, it will take them a long time to put that insight into their life and try to live it well and then express it more clearly. So we have to be patient and recognize that the change will take time. It will not be easy, and it will happen beyond the times where we live. And we have to keep that going and keep being more and more open as we share down the road.
Um, as somebody who has had a life of active ministry across many different parts of the church, both in like your formal paid accountable ministry, in congregational ministry, but then also serving uh, the All Native Circle Conference, and then serving on committees of the church and things like how my first memories of church are, most of them center around all those Native consultations, and my mom's work in the church. I have a couple of my home community of faith from when I was a toddler, but I feel like on the one hand the church has changed so much, and also some of the same struggles around um, how can you expect to have healed hundreds and hundreds of years of colonization in uh, you know 30 or 40 years, and that sometimes it feels like the relationship between the Indigenous churches and the wider church is a little bit like 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. So from your perspective as somebody who's been called to lead the church through some of those conversations and to represent both sides of the river, like where do you feel like our church is at, and how have you seen it change, and what gives you hope? Why are you still here in the church?
I have seen a lot of change within the church. Um, there are a lot of churches that still struggle with the old theology, and how then do we follow that old theology, but also be open. And that's a struggle because some of them don't have really difficulty with that. Like for me, when I do communion, and I haven't done communion too much lately, and haven't led it, but when I do, I think of it as a common meal that we share, not a magical thing that gets us into heaven, but a common meal that we share together. Uh, that I share the bread with you, I share the drink with you, and that's what communion means to me. We sit in the circle of life and share the food in the circle of life, and we honor that. So that when I hear your story and your struggle, and that you hear some people who have moved far and then moved backwards, that's not uncommon. That's part of the wrestling we have to do, because we have to put it into our own context for us to understand, and then come back in the circle and talk some more and keep talking as we share, because the journey is not simple. It's not easy. And it's, to me, like the commitment we make in a marriage relationship. We make that commitment to walk together no matter what the circumstances are. Some of those marriage circles break up because the people have difficulty honoring what the other person said. As someone who's lived uh, many years in a marriage relationship, Barb and I keep working and keep talking and keep wrestling. But that's what we have to do in the church. We have to keep talking and wrestling and keep sharing some of the things, because sometimes the difficult things that we share with each other enlighten the other person as we share that part of our story. And then that person comes back and shares something that challenges us. And then we grow and we wrestle and we journey, because spirituality is not a simple thing. It's the
Mm.
journey of life together and the journey of sharing together what we have, as it is in sharing a meal. The food comes to us, we give thanks for it, we give thanks to the circle for it, we start to eat it. We may not like all the food we get, but we share, and and say, thank you for giving that to me. And that thankfulness opens the door. But it's a lifelong journey. And so I don't think it's simple. And we as a church need to keep wrestling and finding ways of helping younger people uh, recognize that they have a story to share too. They have new insights into all that's happened, and how can we help them as they wrestle, as they go down the road, so that they can be people who help change take place in other people's lives.
Mm. Yeah, I think you've touched on another thing that I struggle with is I travel across the country and I see um the realities of I mean, every region seems to have a different approach or a different context in terms of the life and wellness of ministry with people in the first third of their lives. Like in Pacific Mountain region, we call it first third ministries, but like for children, youth, and young adults, um, you know, in sometimes I feel like in Pacific Mountain region, because we were the like fastest secularizing province in the country for many, many years, and many of our congregations declined ahead of the rest of the country, that we also sort of realized like we're going to need young people in the church for the future of the church, and so sort of reinvested in that. But um I don't always feel like universally we do that well across the church, which is making space for young people to share their stories. um So the theme that I've chosen for general council is visions and dreams. And when I told my mom that, she stopped in her tracks and she said, "You know that that was the theme of the first national consultation, was inspired by these texts from Joel and Acts about our, um, our elders will uh, have visions and our young people will dream dreams." And I always kind of like correct the text for gender inclusivity. um, but um and when, because you were there and because you like, I think that was a place where you pushed the church to say, no, this can't just be like a small task group that's working on developing a print resource, but we actually have to involve the community. It's sort of a, what we'd say in the 21st century, like a nothing about us without us approach. um
Mhm.
but like, what were the dreams of the Indigenous churches at the start of those consultations?
There was a wrestling. Some of the churches uh, felt that they still wanted to belong to the presbyteries and the conferences where they were, and they had difficulty coming into the circle. Others felt that it was time, and we needed to do this, and we needed to talk to each other, hear the stories from across the country of First Nations people, what was happening in those churches and in those communities. And we heard a lot of pain. We heard a lot of uh, times of good relations, but it had to be that we had to hear all those stories. And we sat in the circle for a long time, and we didn't get out of the circle. So when we had conflict, we left that conflict until the next conference came, and we talked about it more and more and more. And sometimes we stayed a little longer in the circle, but and then when we came back, we had more that we could hear from each other. It's going to take a long time. We have listening to each other's stories, and they will be so different. But as we share our story and share how this enriched my life, uh, and experiment with things. In the All Native Circle Conference, we did introduce very early the sweat lodges. And from those, certain people came, other people didn't go to them, but others learned and shared their story, what that meant to them. So introducing new ways of looking at things and talking about things, we'd introduce those to young people in a circle. And as they share their stories and understandings and fears, uh, they will come back again and understand a little bit more the next time. So we recognize that these are steps along the way, and the steps that we walk along the pathway of life take a whole life to walk, and not to be afraid of that. But if we look down the road and want a community that's rich and sharing, we need to recognize that we will lose some and we will gain others. And that's part of the journey. And not to be afraid of
Yeah.
it.
I think this is another sort of thread that's going through my experience of the church is, and it's one of the reasons why I chose our book for September, which is Maximum Canada, which is around this like reliance that we have on immigration in our country, that we need a growing tax base, and with the, as um, people ages 65 and older are living longer, but also making up a bigger and bigger percentage of our population, that we also have a smaller tax base, and we have a very infrastructure heavy country. To run a country of this size with this few people requires a huge amount of taxes, and so that we actually need to grow faster than our birth rate, even though Indigenous people are doing our darndest at 4 to 5 times the national birth rate uh, of overall Canadians. But I think about maybe some of the early in the book you talked about, I think that it might have been where you were talking about Ralph's death, and needing to learn the lesson of like letting go, and the choice that you were faced with, letting go of the hunting knife, or um and um and that there were, like, I mean, the very empathetic part of me is like, you were 11, and like, if you had let go of that knife, is that like, could you and Jim have saved your brother? Nobody but Creator knows that, and my guess is that probably no. And also, like, we hold on so tightly to our positions and our ideas, and I hear people so fearful about the way that new arrivals and Canadian will like change our church in ways that is not okay, and specifically holding on really tightly to our decisions from 1988 and becoming an inclusive church. But everybody that I know that is a new Canadian that comes into our church like embraces our theology. Like, I don't see new any can ministers joining us from the Church of India, or churches in Africa, and saying like, you guys have it all backwards, and like, let's roll back your decisions on inclusivity around sexual orientation and gender identity. And I guess what is it? I'm having a hard time like landing my questions tonight. Um, like how, so you, when your community of faith made the decision not to allow same-gender marriage, but you decided to stay and to continue to be in ministry and to walk alongside the community you were serving, um, like how do we do that as a church and make space for the other, even when we disagree? I feel like that's a thread of wisdom that you've shared over and over again throughout this book.
It's not easy when we don't agree, but we need to recognize, maybe underneath everything else, that we all need to be together. We need to share this story and walk together as well as we can, and recognize there will be times when we don't walk well together, but we all have to be committed to staying in the circle and hearing and understanding. Like holding on to the knife was my wrestling with, do I want this or do I want that? What
Mm,
is more important? And that memory of holding on to the knife and not letting it go was part of that journey of, how do I help my brother? But how do I deal with my guilt in relation to my brother?
mm,
And I had to take psychoanalysis to begin to let that go and to see the bigger picture and hear what my brother told me way back, that the stones that I knocked off did not hit my brother,
yeah.
that he fell himself. But I didn't hear that until many years later when he told me again. And so we hold on to things, and we think that we have to hold on to this instead of being open to, what is the Spirit saying to me now? What
Mm,
is the Spirit saying to our church now, of how we work together and how we share together and how we hear each other's stories? Your story is sacred. The people who are listening, their stories are sacred. We need to hear them. And as I share my story, can I hear your story so that I might grow and I might give more of what I'm holding on to, so that we can all grow together? Because I have to give deeper commitments to the church. And I'm starting to learn to do that more and more as the years go on, that I'm giving more and more to the church where I go, so that it can grow, and to the national church as well. But all that is part of the journey of hearing
mm,
each other and recognizing we do hold on to things,
mm,
but maybe we need to let them go slowly, so that, and look and analyze as to why we're holding on to that. Is that helping? Is that helping the circle of life? Is that helping that other person grow as I hold on to it? So we ask those of ourselves. And as we examine those and share them as we share our stories, we loosen up. And I was able to let go of that story of the knife much later, when I
mhm,
heard more clearly from other people that I worked with what that meant.
mm. So I have a couple more minutes before I'm going to ask Alan to open up to our faithful attendees to our book club. But the big question I asked is, what if there's a message, or and I feel like maybe you've said it over and over again already, but if there's something that you wish for the church to learn or to rumble with from your book, what would that be?
Don't be afraid to share your story, but don't be afraid to listen to the stories of others and what they have to offer. We need to hear everybody, and we need to set up
Mm,
circles big enough so that the whole community shares and is not afraid to share, because a lot of people are afraid to share their story.
yeah.
But we need to be open enough and say enough. I would love to hear your story. I need to hear your song. Learn to sing
Mm,
it well. So that's all I really think the book is about. It's about me being vulnerable and sharing my story. Others are vulnerable when they share their story, but we need to support each other as we go through those vulnerabilities.
thank you. Um, I love that. I think I don't know why, but I think that that's what surprised me most from your book was that like the it wasn't just like a historical chronological. I mean, it is in many ways chronological memoir, but like it is very vulnerable. Like what you've shared is written in an evocative in an emotional way. I only have a few um people's heads in boxes above our pictures on my screen at the moment, but when I said that I laughed and I cried, I saw like people nodding their heads in agreement. And I did, and I think part of that is as somebody who's mixed ancestry, who's Celtic and Irish English on one side and a little bit of Norwegian, that um, I've shared some of those same cultural battles inside myself. I lost a brother to suicide, not to an accident, but my dad also lost a brother about this with about the same age difference who also had drowned in the river. Like there were so many surprising connections in terms of the things that I would never normally hear um, expect to hear from a colleague in ministry necessarily. And one of the pieces of feedback that I've had since I've been moderator is that I I preach and I share about my own personal story. Like I'm sort of a bit of an open book in that I don't um, I don't not talk about my struggles with substance use or um, like lately in Alan and I've had lots of conversations about this has been about like my own personal financial journey and like learning like, oh, I don't have to live paycheck to paycheck. I can learn to manage my money the way that I managed money at work. I know how to do it at work, didn't know how to do it in my personal life. Um, but as I've started to share that story and speak openly with my friends, but also like when I've been out talking at theme times in the church, people come up to me and say like, "Whoa, like I had no idea," and I also struggle with that thing. And like, could we have more conversation about that? Um, and I think that it's also you sharing about your fear of being judged by other people and how that held you back from sharing your story is also a really common experience. The first time that I preached a sermon that was very, very personal, um, and in a way, I was channeling my inner Dolly Lansdowne, and I was kind of saying like, uh, making a very loud statement to the church. I was experiencing uh, people saying to me because I was in a PhD or I did my PhD in theology, and that I appeared to assimilate well into the wider church, that I was really lucky that I didn't have like a normal, like I guess oppressed existence as an Indigenous person in the church. And so I preached this sermon where I was like, I why is that even a thing that people think? Like I'm a person in recovery from using substances. I lost an older brother to suicide. I didn't grow up on a reserve, but I was born like adjacent to a reserve and saw all of the poverty and cycles of violence. And our house was crazy for a lot of my growing up years. And I was sexually abused as a child. And, you know, like I didn't grow up poor. But other than that, like what part of Native existence in Canada did I not experience? And somebody
Mm.
came up to me and said like, whoa, you were like and it was somebody who was a candidate for ministry at the time and was in recovery, and they said, you were really open about the fact that you're an alcoholic. And I said, yeah, like, but also I'm the executive director at First United, like, and I've been ordained for a decade. Like, what's anybody going to do to me at this point in my job? It's an asset to have that lived experience. And also nobody really, other than if I was using that information inappropriately, my board might say something, but nobody has any power over me. Like, you're still a student, and if there's somebody on your interview board or something that has a problem with that. Like, you probably should not, you should use some discretion about how and when you share that story, because there is still a lot of stigma and judgment. And so, like, I get both sides of it, that um we need to be open and vulnerable, but sometimes the church isn't a safe place to do that. So do you have any closing words of wisdom for us about that before we?
The closing words of wisdom in terms of sharing vulnerabilities: we listen to and respond to the spirit that guides us.
Mm,
And we will know when we start to share our story what we will share. We're not doing this alone. The spirit of life is with us.
mm,
And when we share that story, there will be someone who hears in a way that we didn't expect. And they will support us in ways that we don't know. It
mm,
may take time, but I've really trusted the spirit to guide me all the way through. And I've found that. And in my relationship with Barb, she keeps talking about that as well. So we reinforce the fact that we need to listen to what the spirit is guiding us to do and to say, and to trust that we're not alone. We walk together. And we may feel alone, but we will be embraced by someone who understands the journey. And you're sharing your story about your struggles has enlightened me as to some of the struggles that I went through too. And we want to drown ourselves in alcohol or drugs. But then we stop and say, no, that's not the direction that I really need to go in. And I make that decision myself by hearing what the Spirit says to me and understand this is who I am and this is who I was, but this is who I am becoming because I understand my story more fully. And I've heard other people's stories, and those have helped me. And I will continue that. And my journey will always go down the road as people hear my story and I hear their story and I become enriched by what I hear. So you've enriched me. And so I thank you for sharing that as part of the circle of life.
all right, we are at 7:21 Eastern time, 4:21 here in BC. Alan, do you want to open it up for folks in the book club to ask questions or make comments? Okay, Jennifer typed, please read, I love the idea of sharing my story and hearing your story. But how do you encourage others to come into the circle and stay in the circle and be willing to listen?
How do I what? I didn't hear the
Encourage,
rest.
how do you encourage others to come into the circle and to stay in the circle and be willing to listen?
I think that's where those who are leading the circle need to say, what you're going to hear will not always be things that you agree with or understand. Try to be respectful of the person in that circle and recognize that the circle, all of us are equal around the circle. The circle doesn't have a head. We're all equal. We're sharing our stories. And as I share my story, then the next person to me shares their story. I try to respectfully listen. Not everyone will hear your story, but some will. And we have to trust that. It's not easy. And as we change as a church, it will not be easy. But if we respect each other, and we recognize that that person shared so much, I need to find a way to communicate to them and say, I heard that story. Maybe we can talk more as time goes by. Know that you're not alone in your journey, and we need to share that with others. But that's where I think the leadership needs to take the responsibility for making sure that when person has shared and is vulnerable, we stop. And sometimes what we used to do in the circle of the First Nations community is when someone would share something that was very vulnerable, we would take some sage and tobacco and sweetgrass and cedar, and we put it together and we would smudge that person and wipe them down. So we had a ritual by which we helped that person know that they were not alone in the journey and that we were with them as much as we could be. And we can do that. We can do that with we will end this circle with a communion and recognize that as we share and as we pass the communion plate around the circle, so that I take what I have, I pass it to the next person. I'm sharing the meal with you. That meal can be part of the healing that you're going through. We have rituals. We have to do them in a different way that helps us and helps that person who was vulnerable know that we are really glad they shared with us, and that has enriched us. And we should share the meal together. We are part of the family.
I love that. I feel like one of the gifts of one of the gifts that surprised me as moderator is I mean, often if I'm in a worship service and we are celebrating communion, then shocker, I get to ask to preside or at least to serve communion. And and I've had this experience, and it started last fall. So it didn't start right away, but I was at a regional conference fall meeting, and almost everybody was wearing a name tag. And a couple people into serving communion, I think I was handing out the bread, and so as people would come to me, I'd say like, Alf, like I'd make eye contact, say, Alf, child of God, bread for the journey. And then the next person would come, I say, Susan, child of God, bread for the journey. And just like watching people's faces light up as I said their names, acknowledge that they were a child of God. And then like it wasn't just like handing out bread and like bread for the journey, bread for the journey, bread for the journey, but just taking the time to acknowledge each person individually. And you know, and I'm aware of the fact that there's role power with the office of the moderator, and that like it was such a beautiful thing to acknowledge, like the actual, that's the time when I felt like the elected spiritual leader of the church,
Mm.
is when I served communion. And so now, um if it for the most part, I think almost every service since then, even if people are not wearing name tags, I'll say, well, friend, what's your name? And just take the time to do that. And also because when you're moderator, nobody's going to be like, you're serving really slow. um but I love that idea of like closing, sharing circles and time together with ritual. And it doesn't have to be appropriating smudging for non-Indigenous communities, that we have our own rituals in the Christian tradition that we can use for that. And I think communion is a beautiful one for how we, I can imagine being in a circle and just saying that to your neighbor as you pass the elements in circle would be beautiful. Other questions or comments for Alf? Things that you appreciate about the book? All right, Mark, I'm going to read your question first, and then you can also raise your virtual hand, or also I think we're a small enough group you could probably unmute. Murray says, I deeply appreciated your book, but found I could only read it in parts. I needed to take time to absorb and reflect on it.
I'm finding more and more as I read other people's books of their wrestling, I can only do it over a period of time. I read so much and I have to listen to and absorb what people say. So if you take a whole year to read the book, that's fine, because what is lifted up there for you in one of the chapters or one of the paragraphs may be where you need to stop and wrestle yourself with what that means for you. And that's good. That's what it's about. That's what helps us. I find that I've been rereading other books that I've read before and said, wow, I didn't see that there before. I needed to reread it again to find that truth and that experience as you expressed it. So don't be ashamed that it takes a long time to read. That's part of the wrestling and hearing a story. Sometimes we need to hear the story several times before we hear all of the things that we need to know. And maybe we need to come back to it 3 years later and look at that and say, oh, I didn't see that there. But that was good. I now am ready to see that. So that's good. I'm glad you took the time to and are taking the time to read it.
I love the idea of rereading books, and I know that I will reread yours. I I brought it with me on study leave to read, and I struggled with the same thing. And because mom and dad know you too, so I would, and I'm up here visiting my parents, and so I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, listen to this story of when like Alf was like in his imagination racing the his friends on the bikes down the road, and then he encountered the bear." And I'd like stop and read it to them, and they'd be like, "Carmen, your book club's on Thursday, you have to stop telling us these stories and just get reading."
Say hello to
uh
your
I will, it's dad's birthday today, so
okay.
yeah. Whitney, I see your hand.
I wanted to thank you for writing this. I am uh, following at my pastoral charge the shoes of Maxine McVeigh, and um, like all the work she did with the cairn. And I didn't know it arriving at. So this has helped put together all these little snippets and pieces that people have told me and helped me see more of the larger picture of how things came together in the 80s. So, because I was in diapers in the 80s. So this is stuff I need to know. So thank you for
Oh,
writing.
you're welcome. I'm glad you've gained some things from it. It's uh, I had gone out of diapers by the 80s, so I may get into them
Al
as I get into my 80s.
Yes.
Alf, our friends in Jasper have said, question for you, perhaps off topic. Do you feel
Okay.
there's an opportunity for the autonomous Indigenous part of the United Church to participate with congregations who are considering ecumenical partnerships which are being developed?
Read that again, just
Yeah,
let me.
it says, do you feel there's an opportunity for the autonomous Indigenous part of the United Church to participate with congregations who are considering ecumenical partnerships that are being developed? And I don't know, our friends in Jasper, you might have to unmute yourselves and maybe give some context to that. If I don't know if you would find that helpful, Alf.
I think there are opportunities. They will come to us sometimes, and sometimes we need to go to other people in our larger community, because sometimes the Indigenous circle within the United Church isn't immediately in our area, but there may be some traditional people, some sweat lodge keepers and other that you could invite into your circle and just share with us some of the understanding so that we might be more open to you. This is part of what we are struggling with within the United Church. How do we open our doors and how do we become more uh, caring and loving of each other? Could you come and share with us some of your understandings, and we will share and we will try to be open to you. So I think those communities need to be open to going out into that wider circle. Uh, they also might want to invite someone, say, from Norway House, who's part of the United Church. Come down and share with us. We'll pay your way, and you can have a good time with us in Banff or Jasper or wherever. Um, but we want you to share with us to help us understand how we can become more open. But I think to me, it's part of the responsibility of the United Church to reach out and look what's around it and find ways in which they can talk to the wider in spiritual communities as well as the ecumenical communities.
Thank you for that. I so like how you kept repeating in your book that we have to listen to one another and hear one another's stories. And it seems to me that when we look at ecumenical partnerships, that's essential that we learn how to do that. And it doesn't come easily.
No, it doesn't.
Other questions or comments from folks?
It's okay if you don't, because we need to absorb what has been said, and we need to live with it. Then we may have other questions, and Carmen will answer those. but I'm around, and I don't mind hearing what some concerns are and that, and try. I don't have all the answers. I just have some answers in terms of my journey and how I've shared my journey, and how I want to continue to share that journey with you. As you have questions and that, you need to ask them of people around you, so that you can find ways to find deeper understanding and spiritual understanding of the questions that you have and you carry. So don't be afraid to reach out.
All right, I see Yvonne and then June and then a comment from Sue. So Yvonne.
I can't hear.
Yeah,
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Oh, you muted yourself again. There you go.
Okay.
Okay.
Over the years, I've always been very interested in the different spiritual paths that you and your brother Jim took. And it was interesting to read about it in the book and to learn more about it. And as I've been listening to you talk, Alf, I'm wondering if that experience of you and your brother taking quite different paths has influenced your thinking about telling stories and listening. Of course, it's part of the Indigenous culture, but I'm wondering if that the different paths that you and Jim took had an influence on the importance of to make you emphasize the importance of listening.
It's all part of that journey. Jim and I learned from Uncle Nob and Dad. Dad always went down and talked to Uncle Nob about what was going through his life and his wrestling. Uncle Nob remained in the Catholic Church. Dad felt he had to leave the Catholic Church because they wouldn't approve of his marriage to my mother. So they kept talking, and as they talked, they worked things out. My brother and I think learned from that model that we could walk in different ways, but in some ways they were the same way. It was a spiritual journey, and we were both on that spiritual journey, and we could trust each other. But we learned from my uncle and my dad that that is a possibility within family, within community. And I think those are the kind of things we have to trust that the Spirit is saying to us. When we have differences, we need to sit and talk. And you probably have found that within your church, that there are times when you have to sit down and say, okay, I need to sit down with you and talk because these things are separating us, and we need to find ways that we can still walk together and still carry those things, because what you carry and what I carry have such similarities that we will grow from that in ways that we never expected.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Or Chamigwetch, as they say. Big thank you.
Thanks, Yvonne. June. There you go.
Good afternoon,
Good
Carmen
afternoon.
and Alf. On behalf of my study group from the former Wesley United Church in Regina, there's 5, 6, sometimes 7 of us that get together every Tuesday, and I lucked onto your book, Alf, and I started reading it, and I came to the group and said, we absolutely must do this book. Well, do this book has become quite a thing, because we will go through a chapter on a Tuesday morning, and by the time we're done, there has been enough insights from each of the various people that we feel obliged to go back and reread that chapter because we feel like we've missed something. So there's much gold to mine. And one of the things that we appreciated so much is the gentle, loving, wonderful way you had of writing what you were writing. It was as the content was wonderful, but it was how you expressed it that was at least as good for us. And we're very grateful for your book. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's as I say, it wasn't an easy book to write, but what I've learned over life is you need to be honest and you need to be as loving and caring as possible. And I think part of that comes out of the relationships you have with others. The relationship that I have with Barb, my wife, is part of that journey where we've shared and learned to share together and to trust each other in the sharing. And that we've both taken in terms of taking it back into the church. And we shared with different groups our stories as we went along. And no matter where we were willing to help people wrestle with their journey as they shared with us. And we tried to be as open as we could. So that part of the journey is an enriching one. And I feel blessed that I can go into a church and share in that way and know that maybe 2 weeks from the time I was there and come back, somebody says, I have a question. And I feel, okay, I'm glad you do. I'm glad you listened. Or I may have a question for them. So it's all part of that long journey. And I'm glad that you and your group have taken the time and take the time to reread. Those are important. I keep doing that. And I have certain things that one that I mentioned in the book, like Jesus says, who do you say that I am? And I have to keep going back to that passage because there are times when I express myself that, what am I saying that Jesus is and who he is by what I've just said? And so those kind of things, review with the teachings that we've been given and keep going over them because we get deeper insights as others share with us. So reread, that's good.
There's a couple of more comments in the chat. One is from Sue Carlton, and she wrote, I really like the quotation shared in the preface on page 7 about how each of our ways of looking at life are different from each other. And then Carol Scott said, thank you both for the many reminders during this Zoom. I love Alf's book. Looking forward to Carmen's pending book. And then I responded with a laugh emoji.
And thank all those people who kept insisting that I write the book.
Yeah.
Because those people saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. They were also the people, some of those kind of people that said, you've got to go to university. You got something and you need to do this. And part of that is listening to what people say and hearing it instead of hiding behind some of the things that we fear. And so, yeah, so thanks to them and thanks to you for reading it.
I just laughed because I had a joke and it dropped like a stone in water, as my mom would say. Maybe Spirit was saying, nope, don't say that here. Any other? Oh, let's see. I've got one more message down here. Okay, message from David Carr. What is the role of the sweat lodges in better listening to or understanding each other? Or is it more an opportunity to reflect on your own spirituality introspectively?
What I found when I went into the sweat lodge is that as I crawled on my hands and knees and walked into the sweat lodge, because that's the only way you can get into the lodge, and you crawl around the circle to a place that's available to you, It is a personal spiritual journey that you do with a group of people. There are songs that are sung in the sweat lodge, but it's that incredible heat and letting go by the sweat, that you're letting go of things and you're opening yourselves to hearing what the Spirit is saying to you. So in a sense, going into the sweat lodge is like going into the church on your hands and knees, sitting in the pew and saying, what is the Spirit saying to me through what is being said in word and in song? And what can I take out of here as I leave the sweat lodge, as I leave the church, that I can carry into the wider world? New insights into myself. Because the sweat lodge, when you go into it humbly, and you come out of it humbly. You come out with truth, you come out with understanding, you come out with teaching. You go into the church, you go in there in a humble way, and you come out humbly and learn from what has been taught, from the Spirit, from what has happened. So that's what I get out of the sweat lodge, and what I find common about any kind of spiritual experience. As I go in there humbly, and come out humbly, I have so much that I have learned, and I've got to find a way of incorporating that into my life and living it. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can see David's screen, but he gave you a thumbs up.
Okay.
I've never had the opportunity to sweat, and when I was reading your book, I was thinking about we didn't traditionally have sweat lodges here on the coast, but most, if not all, I think coastal peoples had ritual bathing in the ocean, and actually, like, sometimes like flogging the body with hemlock branches, and hemlock is a really strong medicine, and there's like actual, now that they've studied it, there's actual, it's not like a Middle Ages like Roman Catholic self-flagellation thing, but there's medicinal benefits to the hemlock, but also to increasing your circulation, and just like the sweat can be a way to let go. I think the cold plunges are things that we share culturally with some Scandinavian countries as well, and there are medical and spiritual benefits to it. And I kept wishing when I was reading a book that I was from your part of the world, because I really, 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 really hate cold water, which is why I've never done it. And I love going in saunas, and I'll like do the scan, and maybe this is like the little tiny bit of me that's Norwegian. Like, I will go and sit in a sauna or a steam bath for 15 minutes and then like go into 4-degree water for 20 seconds, and I can do that as long as I can get out and go and like chill for 20 minutes. But yeah, I haven't done either, but I also felt when I was reading your book, like, oh, okay, it's time. Like, maybe instead of what I was thinking about doing for my final retreat next year before General Council, what I have to do is go home to Kunsut and learn how to do that bathing from my aunties, because I can see and hear what richness has come to you spiritually from that part of your tradition, and that maybe I have to get over my fear of cold water.
Yeah.
We had an old elder in our village named Grandpa. Everybody called him Grandpa Moses. And he was one of our language keepers, so he spoke Hesuchla first, and he used to he was a hereditary chief, and every year he would have a feast to maintain his good name. So our economy was built around caring for others, and our potlatches was almost like a direct inverse of the capitalist system. And so you got power and prestige from the more people you could provide for. And so to maintain the upstanding of his name, he would just feed the whole community once a year. And he'd always start off his speeches by saying, "Thank you, my people, for leaving the comfort of your home to come and to witness this
Mm.
work that we are about here. And then he'd say, it's really hard for myself. And he would mean speaking in English was hard. So he's like, I'm going to change now. And then he'd start speaking in our language. And, but we joke in our family whenever we have a hard, like we know we have to kind of like turn around and do things a different way. We always channel our inner Grandpa Moses and say, it's really hard for myself. I'm going to change now. And so now I feel like I have to. Now I told all of you. So if you come to General Council, you'll say, did you go do your ritual bathing at Kunsut? And then I can say, yes, I did, or no, I didn't. You'll have to come to General Council to find out.
Okay, yeah.
Any other questions or reflections or thoughts to share with Alf? I'm gonna cough. I'll be right back. I always give gratitude to God if I'm on Zoom and I can manage to mute myself before I cough and blow somebody's eardrums out. All right. Well, thank you so much, Alf. I also will be going back through your book and reading it and rereading it. I know many people in the church have read Richard Wagamese's Meditations Embers and use it in that way, but I think that your book is another rich resource we can use for reflection and learning. And I think you've modeled that so much in how you've written the book, because you're not just telling the stories of your life and your ministry, but also what you've learned from them, and including the realizations you might have had years or decades later. And you're modeling for us exactly the thing that you're encouraging for us to do in our own lives. And so Wallace Gaescha for your vulnerability and this beautiful gift that you've given to the church.
Che Miigwech for listening to me today, and Che Miigwech for reading. It's all part of our journey. I'll read your book when it comes out.
I have to stop getting on and off airplanes long enough to actually write some. Friends, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Just a reminder, our next book club, we're going to take a 2-month break for summer. So you're off the hook for July and August, and then we'll reconvene September 26th, 6:30 Eastern time. And our next book will be Maximum Canada by Doug Saunders, and I will work with the communication staff to make sure that the website and ChurchX and everything all gets updated with the schedule from there. So thanks again to Alf and to all of you for your faithful attendance and the ways that you're engaging with so many of the disparate ideas and interests that I have. And also, Alf, thank you for, I keep saying it's a gift to the church, and it is, and I think it's a beautiful way to have one of these special centennial editions of our book club to focus on United Church authors. And you know, your way of speaking and writing carries the tradition of, you know, Anishinaabe people and Indigenous people across the country that we've been here since time immemorial, and your way of communicating and teaching brings that into the church for us, and I'm so grateful for you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have a good night.
Thanks so much, friends.
Okay.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.